Well, millions of newspapers didn't get to the stands on Saturday after climate change activists blocked major printing presses.
Yes, the protest group Extinction Rebellion says it took the action against newspapers owned by Rupert Murdoch to highlight what it regards as a failure to report accurately on the climate crisis.
But it wasn't just Rupert Murdoch's papers, it was also the Telegraph, the Daily Mail and others, so it was, well, in my opinion, a shameful attempt to suppress free speech. But was the protest effective at raising awareness for the cause, as the whole thing actually stifled not just free speech, but also the efforts by this group to actually achieve what they want to achieve? Well, joining us now is comedian and journalist Andrew Doyle, who says this kind of woke activism doesn't work. Broadcaster Daryl Morris, who says freedom of protest and freedom of the press go hand in hand. And co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, Clare Farrell, who says the protests got the results they wanted as it's made a huge impact. Let's start with you, Clare Farrell. What I was most curious about, one of your targets to stop coming out was the Sun newspaper owned by Rupert Murdoch. In that edition of the Sun, there was a whole page by Sir David Attenborough warning about climate change, the very thing that you accused the papers of not doing and ignoring. So there you have one of the most eminent environmentalists in the world writing a first-person piece to millions of Sun readers, informing them and guiding them about the perils of climate change and why to take it seriously. And they didn't get to read it because you and your protesters stopped that paper being able to be given to its readers. Can you explain on any level why that isn't utterly ridiculous?
Well, thanks for having me on, Piers. I mean, the first thing to say is that, of course, we don't know what the Sun are about to print the day before, do we? So, you know, it wasn't targeted in that way at all. But if people were listening to the message that David Attenborough has brought over and over again, alongside many, many other experts, that we face a future with 3 to 4 degrees of warming, which is beyond catastrophic, which means that there is likely to be the breakdown of civilization and the destruction of what's been built up by humanity over the last few thousand years, then don't you think it would be worth more than a single op-ed or a single piece?
Do you think that's all those papers have done?
Sorry, Susanna?
Are you suggesting that's all those papers have done, where actually, in many cases, they have covered comprehensively what's happening with the climate crisis?
Well, there are many, many problems with the way that climate change gets reported on. You know, often people are talking about the symptoms, they're talking about the things that happen now as a result of the warming world, but they're not talking about the cause, and they're not focused on things like government failure, government inaction. I just heard you earlier, Piers, say that you wouldn't trust Boris Johnson as far as you could throw him. And I think seeing this COVID pandemic and the way the government has handled this, the incompetence that's in our government is definitely not what
Here's my problem, Claire. I broadly agree with the fact that we need to take climate change more seriously, that it's a very real thing and it's a very real danger to the planet. What I find impossible to agree with are the tactics that you and your group constantly deploy, which seem to me to have the complete opposite effect. They don't bring anybody with you. Nobody wakes up and goes, oh, good, they're doing stupid stuff again, I must support their cause. They think, who are these annoying people? And why should I support them? So the cause that you're trying to promote gets damaged with these stunts. That's my point.
Well, Piers, if I may, I think the public response has been quite different. Obviously, the response that you've seen has been from the media itself, and they're annoyed with what we've done. But there's been a really, really big positive response to us, actually, from the general public and from lots of journalists. You know, there were journalists and hacks on that action who took that action.
They're
and
not
if you
journalists,
look at
are they? They're just Dumbo activists. Because if a journalist thinks that the way to actually deal with this problem
is to shut down
journalism, to shut down newspapers and to stop newspapers that are literally carry David Attenborough's warning about climate change, then they are not journalists. They are Dumbo activists. Let's bring in Andrew Doyle. Andrew, you've got a brilliant book. Your wonderful alter ego, Titania McGrath, my little first book of intersectional activism. But there's so much great stuff in that book, and please go and buy it. It's brilliant. So much great stuff, really, about constantly how the woke activism tactics are completely self-defeating. And I completely agree with it. But explain what you mean.
Yes, that's the point, isn't it? That actually, this sort of stuff doesn't work. What it does is it makes people very resentful, because people are largely, by and large, open to persuasion, and they want to hear the arguments and they want to have the discussion. But when you prevent them from getting to work or getting to hospitals, as happened when Extinction Rebellion were on Westminster Bridge, or in this case, preventing reading the newspapers that they want to read, they feel like they're having these views imposed upon them rather than being persuaded. That doesn't work. You know, it just doesn't work at all. I mean, yes, we're talking about Extinction Rebellion now more because of the protests. So in that sense, it's raised awareness. But on the other hand, it's also turned a lot of people off, and a lot of people aren't going to support them now.
Well, Daryl Morris, you are broadly supportive, aren't you, of Extinction Rebellion? You work for Talk Radio, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch. And what is your feeling here? Do you support the actions of the protest group which shut down the journalism produced from that stable, or do you think that it is actually going to backfire?
Well, I think let's start with the point, right? The argument that this sort of activism doesn't work, radical activism doesn't work, is undermined, isn't it, by a million examples throughout history of where it clearly has worked. History is littered with examples of where it's worked. But equally, I think that protests always have to ask themselves this question: are we getting caught up in the method without really thinking about the ends? That is to say, is this the best way to bring about change? Andrew Piers, I'm afraid to say that a blanket this kind of activism simply doesn't work is wrong. Claire, I'm also afraid to say that that this is, that you're wrong to say that this is the only approach. Saturday was quite a good example of that, Susanna, because the thing, freedom of protest and freedom of press share the same oxygen. They go hand in hand. We have freedom to protest, whether you like what's being protested or not, and we have freedom of press, whether you like what's being pressed or not. And so what happened on Saturday was wrong-headed. But frankly, there's always going to be somebody who gets stuck in a traffic jam. There's always going to be somebody who can't get to work.
What do you make of Claire's point that simply by doing something so high-profile, that winding up and irritating so many people actually gets us all talking about the issue? Does it get us talking about the issue, or does it get us talking about the method?
A bit of both. I think it's absolutely undeniable that what Extinction Rebellion...
Sorry, but do you think we are talking more about climate change as a result of shutting down those presses and stopping that article by Sir David Attenborough, for instance?
Yes, well, we're talking about climate change as part of the conversation, aren't we? And so that in itself is actually very powerful. But I think you're right. I think you're right to take this. We have to take this on a case-by-case basis, right? There are some things that Extinction Rebellion do that are right on the money, that actually are absolutely targeted at the right people.
Like what?
Do get like climate change, like a lot of the activism. Actually, a lot of the activism of late last year, with the exception of some of the.
Well, go on, name one thing they've done. Name one thing they've done that actually encouraged people to join their movement.
All sorts of stuff. I mean, all sorts of stuff. I mean, a lot of the stuff that happened in Trafalgar Square, the sitting that happened in Trafalgar Square.
I mean, they just sat down in Trafalgar Square. I've seen football hooligans do that. What's the difference?
I know, but Piers, well, it got a lot of coverage, didn't it, Piers? It got a lot of coverage.
That's the issue, isn't it?
I mean, look, Clare Farrell, here's the problem that I have with it. I saw Diane Abbott popping up yesterday describing this as like the suffragettes. The suffragettes risked their lives to win the vote for women. You have the vote. You have the Green Party. You have a democratic society where you can have politicians who fight your case. When you do this kind of thing, when you stop newspapers coming out in a free democratic society, that is not the way to get what you want. It's the way to, in my opinion, to damage your chances of getting what you want.
Well, Piers, we've had many decades of inaction, and public knowledge and understanding on this topic is not where it needs to be. This is a huge threat to civilization.
How are they going to find out where it needs to be if, when David Attenborough writes about it, you clowns stop people reading it?
Piers, do you feel that you really fully understand the science and the way that we're heading? Because
yes, I'm not talking. I've said to you already, I believe that climate change is real and a real danger. My point to you is, if you're trying to persuade newspapers to tell their readers better stuff about climate change, and you stop them coming out on the very day David Attenborough writes a whole page about it, then you are the fools, aren't you?
No, Piers, I don't agree, because as I've explained, one day, one piece from David Attenborough is not meeting the scale of this threat. You know, we've seen the government has been told by its own climate change committee that they are failing on the majority of counts that they should be acting. They've just turned down the opportunity to use the COVID situation to reset our economy, to reorganise things so that we can try to decarbonise. And they've actually spent billions of public money bailing out carbon-heavy infrastructure.
Why don't you just be... Look, the suffragettes had a fantastic... The suffragettes had an amazing cause to fight for. Why don't you guys just stop being so annoying? Seriously.
I have to say, sorry, in Claire's defence, the suffragettes were seen as quite annoying at the time, and, and the cause wasn't that popular. That's what they had to fight for.
Let me bring in Andrew Doyle again. Andrew, you know, already this morning we've had some ridiculous stories. You know, a hair salon owner being told she can't place a job advert for a happy new stylist because it discriminates against unhappy people. We have Bristol University now telling its sports and physio teachers and instructors they can't use language like you should burn off some calories today because it's fat phobic to people, right? It all conjures up this impression that wokery in all its guises is making this country a laughing stock. And when I see Extinction Rebellion, who have some very laudable aims amid all the madness, when I see them shutting down the press and stopping David Attenborough communicating his message, I'm like, you put it all together, it's like, what's going on here?
This is the point, is that most of these activist movements at the moment have been infected with this social justice ideology, this woke ideology that is really resistant to free speech and has at its heart a kind of authoritarianism. I mean, that's the case. They don't want people to make their own minds up about things. They want to decide for other people. So it's not just about the climate. I mean, we saw the other day with the Black Lives Matter protesters in America storming into restaurants, trashing tables, attacking people who are just trying to eat their meals. That's got nothing to do with racism and police brutality. And similarly with this, I mean, with Extinction Rebellion, I remember the co-founder, Stuart Basden, writing that it wasn't just about climate, it's about the patriarchy and Eurocentrism and heteronormativity and class hierarchy and all the rest of it. So the problem with the social justice woke activists is they've got a million things all wrapped up into one thing. It gets very confusing, and they want to impose their view through authoritarian means.
Claire, yeah, I mean, I would suggest, the thing is, what you want, Claire, is the powerful voices on your side explaining the climate crisis. But if you shut those powerful voices, and many of them, of course, are in our newspapers, if you shut those down, you're not encouraging them to get on board, are you?
Well, this was just a very brief delay. I mean, a lot of newspapers still did get delivered, but they were late. And if you look at the difference between taking about 30 years for people to sort of begin to admit that there is a crisis. When we were told 30 years ago, absolutely, you must reduce your carbon emissions. Otherwise, humanity faces an existential threat. It will be catastrophic. You know, when we were told that, how well was that reported? How much have people focused on it over the last 30 years? How much have the press taken the government to task on the fact that they're not educating people, they're not decarbonising the economy, they don't have a plan? You know, how much of the media actually helped with this? Not enough.
Let me ask you, look, you've got a nice wooden thing behind you. What's that made of?
Oh, Piers, don't do this. You did this to Skeena about TVs.
Just ask you a question. What's it made of?
Are you talking about a set of shelves behind me, Piers?
They're made of wood, right?
About civilization.
How many trees have you destroyed for that?
This is stupid. Don't be stupid.
My issue again with, you see, none of you actually practice what you preach, do you? You all guzzle power. You all have wooden shelving from IKEA or whatever. You all do the opposite, actually, to what you preach to the rest of us. If you're going to shut down newspapers, which I love and have worked in for a lot of my life, I'm entitled to ask you where you get all your wooden ornaments from, aren't I? And you don't want to answer because it's embarrassing because you don't practice what you preach.
The public, Piers, and my understanding of you is that as a journalist, you think it's a journalist's job to uncover the truth, and I think that's something that you've been quoted as saying.
I just asked you a question you refused to answer. How can I uncover the truth if you don't answer the question? Where does it come from? Where did your wooden ornament come from?
I don't own the furniture in this house. I live in a shared house, so that belongs to somebody else. But if you would like to
surely your principle would mean you'd want to get rid of it and put some more sustainable artefacts in your property. My point is, a lot of you lead very different lives to the ones you keep lecturing us to lead, and that doesn't help. If you want to be...
about the life they should lead, Piers. We're lecturing the government on how they should act and how things need to be changed. We've been told that we need to see a fundamental change in all aspects of all lives all over the planet within a very, very short time frame. And I don't know about you, but the only thing that I've seen recently that's changed anything is COVID.
Okay.
And it's
well,
proved
next time I interview you, I hope to see those wooden shelves gone and replaced by some more carbon neutral.
OK, can I just...
materials of-
Claire, can I just put the wooden shelves to one side for one moment? Because Lisa says Extinction Rebellion caused nothing but a nightmare for our newspaper delivery business. I understand the message, but I don't agree with the methods. Our van went out several times that day to try and catch up with deliveries. Surely that's worse for the environment.
And at a time when the newspaper industry has been decimated by the pandemic, newsagents have been decimated, people who do delivery drives for the paper's been decimated, and your response to all the hardship they've gone through is to put them through even more hardship and stop David Attenborough talking about climate change. On every level, it's a lose-lose. And you've got wooden bookshelves. Anyway, thank you all very much indeed for the debate. As always, Andrew Doyle, terrific book. Great to have you on the programme. Urge everyone to go and buy it. This wokery stuff has to end.
Has anyone else got a book out about wokery?
I've got a book about wokery.
Oh, have you?
Called Wake Up, and it's aimed at wokies.
Look forward to it.
Still ahead of Good Morning Britain. Footballing legend Gaz has pleaded burglars after 100...